listening to a Frozen Truth production.
Welcome back to Tuesdays with Maurice, and I'm Justyn Payne. I'll be like your host, moderator, whatever. But but really, we took a week off for the sake of spring break. We live in Central Texas, and the thing is, when spring break happens around UT or Austin, really everybody takes off or does something. It is a semi-national holiday. And so we took part of that, and so I took my children to the zoo, to Moody Gardens in Galveston, to the aquarium, to the Children's Museum, and tried to do my best to keep them full of activities. And I know you had a great plethora of things that you were doing musically wise, because sometimes the best part about South by Southwest in this area is that it opens up so many different new gigs for us to take that we normally may not have taken.
Actually, I had a wedding job on Saturday, and it was in Georgetown. And I had to learn 2 new songs. Lee Ritenour.
Mm-hmm.
Is It You?
Okay.
Cool, kind of soft funk, fusion sort of, but as much R&B as it is fusion. Tune, that was nice. And then the other one is You Are the Love of My Life, that was Roberta Flack and George Benson, which was interesting because Roberta Flack just died and we were just talking about it, and so then I ended up learning a tune that she sang with George Benson. Both nice songs. Played them at the prelude at the beginning. It was cool. It was a long gig, 10:30 to 3.
Ooh-wee.
But they paid us well.
Okay.
And they fed us.
Okay.
So,
And that's the other thing. I have done, here we are, let's talk about wedding gigs. Is
either the bane or the joy of a musician's existence. Sometimes both at the same time.
I've been a musician, I've been a DJ. I think I preferred being a DJ because then I get to have a little bit more direct interaction with the crowd vocally. But I will say there's no greater joy, let's start with the joy part, of being a part of someone's forever memory.
Mm-hmm.
It's sometimes I've heard weddings and they don't comment about, oh, the cutlery was so wonderful, and you might get a mention of the centerpieces or whether or not you took them home. But half the time it's either the band was awesome, the DJ was awesome, or the reverse, the DJ was trash, or the band was horrible. It's always seemingly whatever the music was, that seems to be the thermometer of the success of a wedding. And a lot of feedback. Not to say, maybe just because I'm a musician, but like, it's always fun to realize that this will stick with this family for generations almost. My own daughter, this morning, woke me up. She was in a joyous mood. She was wearing her little Elsa heels, little princess heels. And she said, "Daddy, come dance with me." And I learned long enough, if your daughter says, "Come dance with you," you figure it out. You do it. But then she doubled up on her cards. I don't know what put her in this mood, but she said, "Can you dance with me the song that you and Mommy danced to at your wedding?" I said, it's 6 o'clock in the morning. You trying to get my heart like this? So we danced. But then after that, after a couple of rounds, I turn her and it's beautiful. I'm like, AJ, my son comes around. He wants to come dance. So then Allie's dancing with AJ. I'm like, well, let me go get Mrs. Payne. And just, we're recreating almost our wedding at the house. And now the children are involved. And it all just goes back essentially to the beauty of the music at the moment when it happened, how that just transported all of us into a state of joy. That's why I love playing weddings, or getting the right wedding song, for example.
Oh, yeah. No, I have a good story about that for myself. My wife and I chose Love Is Here to Stay by George Gershwin.
Okay.
It's very clear our love is here to stay. And at one point, I was playing with a band called Small World. Rest in peace, Kyle Keener. One of the first people who put me to work when I got down here. Great musician, great singer, great drummer, great person. And Polly Harrison, if you see this, she's the other half of Small World. She's still working jobs, still plays great guitar. Anyway, they encouraged me to sing at various points, and so I called Our Love Is Here to Stay because my wife was in the audience. By the way, I just said Our Love Is Here to Stay. The title of the song, the official title, is Love Is Here to Stay.
But the
lyric is Our Love Is Here to Stay. So most people call it Our Love Is Here to Stay.
Okay.
And I just fell into the same thing. So I called Love Is Here to Stay, and I sang it and played it. And then at one point, I told Kyle, cover for me. And so they kept playing. And I went down and stood by her table and put my hand out and asked her to dance.
Yeah.
And so she kind of teared up a little bit, and then we danced together. And then Kyle sang the song out. So we danced to Kyle singing our wedding song. We didn't dance together at our wedding.
Oh, you sly person.
It was awesome. It was that's one of my favorite memories of being married to Beverly, is how much that moved her and how wonderful that was. Because the way it worked out, I played the song at our wedding. We didn't have a band. Right, we had a very small wedding.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Partially because we were broke, but partially because weddings can very easily turn into a circus.
Brother man.
And a friend of mine said something about it I really liked. He said it's taking something very serious and making something frivolous out of it. Now that's not always the case,
but
I've been at weddings where I thought they were wonderful.
Right.
But it can very easily turn into a sideshow that takes completely away from what it's really about. Two people leaving their comfort zone to commit to one another.
Yes.
That's the point. So, we had a very short wedding ceremony and then had a party with our friends. And I played piano and we played recordings, but we didn't have a recording for us to dance to. Somehow we didn't plan that. So it was kind of cool that came around and we got to do that later.
But the power of the moment to, like I said, to transport migrate the feeling and the moment back to the present. We can maximize the present because of a musical moment that was solidified in another time. Sometimes I think that's why I love music so much, because it is a time capsule.
I had an experience like that in front of the Intro to Fine Arts class once. I don't remember her name now. She was an undergraduate student who could sing, really sing. And
Morgan Bierlein?
No, but she could really. Morgan can really sing.
Shout out to Morgan.
No, this woman was singing opera. It was I think it was a Puccini aria.
Okay.
And she asked me if I could play it for her, and I don't really play classical music very much, and so I'm looking at it like, okay, yeah, I think I can play this one because I could figure out, how to make it work, even if I had to leave things out. When we hit it, I played the introduction, and she sang it, and afterwards she turned around to me and she went, beautiful. And it was weird. It was one of those moments where we never played any music together before. We didn't rehearse it. It was just something happened and just, and we were like, all the vibrations, this sounds like a cliche, the vibes were right, man. But it's true. But music is vibration.
Yes,
and there's
sir.
a moment that this happens with musicians. Everything vibrates together.
Yes.
And when that happens, it becomes very easy to play music with someone because everything is just in sync. It's like the Zen and the art of archery, all that stuff that people talk about. Being in flow, whatever. Well, we were in flow for that song. And it was really quiet. Before people applauded. When we hit the end of it, people were just like, and then they started to applaud.
Right.
And I made the point at that time that what had happened between the two of us, and this has nothing to do with the fact that she's female and I'm male. That's not the reason. It could happen between two males. It could happen between two females. It can happen, That connection is such that if we met again in another 10 years and I played that same introduction to that same song and she sang it.
Right.
All the years would disappear.
Yes.
I have had that experience with so many musicians so many times. All of a sudden, I'm back to the first time we played music together and really connected, or to use a word I've heard some people use entrained. And I'm not sure what that means, but I think it means the same thing as flow. Right.
That is one of the joys of being a musician, indeed, is that transcendental moment of harmony and synchronicity of shared experience. And then I guess there's a sudden trust that also evolves in there. There's a trust that establishes so that when you see, I mean, because let's just say like this, there's certain people, when you see them on the gig, you know automatically it's a good gig. I don't care what we play. We're going to be okay. It's almost like that Step Brothers moment. Did we just become best friends? Yep. Like that just happened. Talladega Nights. And I'm going to even throw this out there just for the sake of, for the youth and those that watch out. I'm shouting out names because I'm really enjoying just celebrating people. There's this one person that I really celebrate. I haven't met the whole current stable of musicians at Texas State currently right now in 2025, but I sat in at Uproot Jazz Jam, and the bass player, her name is Mercedes Solis.
Okay.
And
did we hear her when we heard the Texas State Jazz Band?
No, she's in the, I think she's in the jazz orchestra.
Okay.
But she held it down wonderfully at the jam. And I came up, I'm playing for the first time, actually like in a jam for years, first time playing. But I remember, that feeling when you lock in with your bass player and you're in tune with the rhythm section, how much that shifts the entire room. And I salute her. Doesn't matter our age, doesn't matter our ethnicity, doesn't matter our gender. It's the fact that we were in tune to the music at the time for what was exploring and evolving at the time. I mean, I even gave her a nickname because I enjoyed the conversation we had musically so much. I called her Lollipop, the legend of the Pop Solis. I'm like, that's such a jazz name because she had like a lollipop while she was working. I'm like, come on, that's a beautiful jazz. It's legend. Like, come on, you got this lollipop.
There was Pops Foster, so she can be Pop Solis.
Yeah, Pop Solis. You got Pops Foster.
And Pops Solis, yeah.
Yeah, it just and then Pops Lolly, like it's the way it all evolved. I always I look forward. That's the other part. I look forward to playing music because I played with that bass player.
Yeah,
I'm like,
of course,
man, I got to get back into another jam because that person at that time, the way we sort of had that conversation musically, it's like I can trust to say something. She was able to say it back. She threw something out. I was able to catch it.
Sure.
And then you have those moments that are not exactly orchestrated, not exactly written, but sort of organic in its moment. I always feel like between that musically and also within life, you have to cherish and nourish those because not everything is always as easy. You can sit down with the most talented musicians and they can still be almost a jerk musically. They just bully you down. They tell you what to do, what to play. Don't overplay it, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, okay, fine. Let me just do my job. But then your job it feels like more like a job than your passion.
Well, it becomes one of those situations where you're like playing.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can't wait to get out of there. Yeah. I mean, music, it's a misnomer to think music is always fun. There are times when definitely because of the band leader, because of the venue, because of the instruments you're given to play, any number of things, it can turn it into a problem. And what's interesting is in some areas, this is recognized. I remember a movie about piano players. I think it was called The Performance. It was with Richard Dreyfuss. I can't remember who else was in it, but they were concert pianists. And this woman got sat down to play something, and one of the keys on the piano was messed up. So she started, and of course there was this really clanky note that came out, and she just stopped. And they said, we'll fix the piano. So she's playing at this highest level of performance, and if there's something wrong with the piano, no, you come back. We realize how devastating this is. Come back later. Now, I remember that happening to me. Nobody offered to fix the piano for me. Being a jazz guy, I played on pianos that were like, I showed up for one thing where they have this really nice event, and everything's beautiful, but then they've got this little dog of a spinet that the sustain pedal doesn't work on.
Ooh-wee.
So it's like, I always counsel pianists learn to play without the sustain pedal. because you never know. You're going to show up sometime and it won't work.
Yeah.
I've had that experience a couple of times. So you learn how to connect things with your fingers. But yeah, I mean, it's one of the nice things about it is as my skills, this is me personally, as my skills have increased, the number of experiences like that where things are negative and such a drag that I don't want to play anymore, that I want to throw something through the wall, whatever, have diminished. When I was younger and trying to learn to play, I had a lot of those because sometimes I was the reason, right?
Ooh, fair.
You know,
Well,
sometimes I was the one that was derailing the job because I wasn't prepared, you know, for things that were being thrown at me.
Yeah.
You know, so
that is always, I guess that's the reflective moment of that, is that you can value maybe the development, the help, the conversation. I think I go back to of in that moment, how did we get through this? You know, I think that sometimes the best moments in life, if I were to pivot, is that the best moments in life are not always the joyous moments that are perfect. It's the joyous moments that were hard, hurtful, broke, and then through that, we can look back and say, man, we got through that though. Like, we were able to push that car with a flat tire in the middle of the rain, but we laughed about it. And remember that time you scraped your foot or something like that? Like, it's always, half the time your memories are the greatest memories are always full of the grief and the grit and the pain of working through something inexperienced and uneducated.
the Japanese have a concept called wabi sabi, which means that the imperfect, that there's beauty in imperfection, and there's a skill that's highly prized in both Korea and in Japan and in China, I'm pretty sure as well. I know it's present in Japan. I know it's present in China. If a pot is broken, you take the pieces and you put it back together with this gold stuff.
Right.
It's like, you know, it's metal, and they melt it and use it as the adhesive. It's gorgeous.
Right.
The pots look more beautiful after they've been broken and reassembled.
And they actually are so much more valuable because they say that because a pot will never be broken the same way with another, it is completely unique in that space.
Right. Now, however, there was something you said that got me thinking about another conversation I watched with Malcolm Muggeridge, who was famous for being a curmudgeon. In other words, one friend of mine said, you know, if I had Malcolm Muggeridge's attitudes, I don't know how I'd even walk out the front door, right? But anyway, and he's talking to William Buckley, and he said, as I come to this point in life, he says, I realize the only things that have taught me anything are those things which have been painful. And I don't agree with him. I don't think, no, I think some things have been a joy. Yes, okay, and it goes to the thing you're talking about the joy being mixed with pain and the pain being mixed with joy. There are some people I have engaged with as a reader who are philosophical thinkers, whether they were writing fiction or nonfiction, who challenged me. Mm-hmm. And so maybe I got a headache because, you know, that's one of the other things I've told people, students and other people. If you're getting a headache from something and it's skill acquisition, that means you're learning, right? Thinking like that will cause headaches.
Rewiring your brain. Quite
you're
literally.
Exactly. You're reassembling something and reassembling it inside your head. So, of course, you're getting a headache. At the same time, the challenge of coming to grips with what this person was trying to teach me was so engaging that I didn't care. So, am I learning from something that's causing me pain, or am I learning from something that's giving me joy, even though it's taking some physical effort, some stamina, some willpower, some I don't care, damn the torpedoes full speed ahead, whatever, to get from one end of it to another. So, I mean, I'm not sure I agree with Mr. Muggeridge on that assessment, but I immediately thought about it when you said what you said about, For instance, having to dig the car out of snow, and yet we're laughing about it because we're together. That's a real thing.
Right.
Anybody who's been married or has had a close friendship knows all about that. You can,
that's
have
sometimes
joy in weird circumstances.
In my young old age, sometimes that's the greatest part about your friendships is the reminiscing of, remember that time? And that time was at the time horrible.
Well, yeah. It reminds me of something Richard Pryor said. We said that stuff be funny now.
It wasn't funny back then.
It wasn't funny at all then.
and then there's I think that's always one would say no one endeavors for resilience at the time. Where I'm going through something, I'm going to be resilient. No, it's evolved reaction, almost like a callus of life that you create.
You don't think a person who's weightlifting is aiming for resilience, or a person who's running marathons is aiming for resilience as part of the activity?
Resilience to me is the result of activity.
Okay.
It is developed result. Like if one were to give up, if one were to drop the set, if one did not finish the race, or the conditioning to the finish of whatever that was, to make it through the day, to make it through the hour, the minute, if one were to not make up that decision to finish until that moment. Sometimes that decision to finish is at the last foot, the last minute, the last mile, the last whatever. And until then, you're struggling the entire time.
Right.
And that struggle is also the character of resilience.
Okay, you just remind me of another quote. This one, I'm just throwing it out there because it's funny.
Yeah.
I can't remember who said it. Maybe W.C. Fields. I'm not sure who said it. If at first you don't succeed, try again. Then quit. No sense being a fool about it.
Exactly.
Sometimes the resilience isn't worth the effort.
And that's a good one. Because that's how some people, they result their lives, and then at the same time, when you look back about it, it's like, if I had quit, I wouldn't be who I am. And that's why if we go back to another moment we thought about it, it's like, it's hard to be grateful if you were successful the entire time.
Is anybody successful the entire time? I mean,
some people live their lives in that space. It's like, I would say they calibrate their thinking that I'm only successful when things are going right. And so they're only grateful for what is right and not for what is wrong.
I'm thinking about people who seemingly had that kind of charmed existence. The first two people that came to mind for me were Mozart and Picasso.
Okay.
Now, Picasso showed incredible promise as a painter from his early years. His father was a professional painter, exhibited in galleries, taught art, all that. And he put his career on hold to promote his son's career. That's how much he was impressed with the young Picasso. And if you see some of his work as a teenager, realism, just out of top flight. Right. He and his father parted company when Picasso went into abstraction because he didn't like it.
Thank you. That's
so. This is a guy who he was the darling of Paris.
Yes.
He did have moments where he wondered if he was going to wind up like Toulouse-Lautrec or some of these other people. Van Gogh, bereft, right? But he was one of the most successful artists financially, right? And in terms of fame and regard in the 20th century, right? Probably ever, period. But obviously the relationship with his father, I don't know how that impacted his life, so that would have been a challenge that he had.
Indeed.
So it wasn't just in other words, I'm thinking of here's a guy who was extremely successful.
Right.
As the world counts success.
Yes.
But he had this other challenge with his father, and then he also had the challenge from time to time of looking at his work and realizing, okay, it's time to turn everything inside out.
Are they not intertwined in the resolve of his personal direction of his art? And or because art can imitate life imitates art, depending on, sometimes it they take turns, where there could be, I'm inserting this, but it's just, especially as a father, having father relationships, oftentimes you have fathers say, you are successful, keep doing this. This is the definition of success, because fathers will want for their children to be provided for and secure. So, yes, we see that evolution of the father promoting and supporting and agreeing. But if there's disagreement, if there's personal things that we don't know of, it could be reflected in the art of abstraction, or even the reverse of, because of the choice of abstraction, the father's blessing and the father's covering and the father's interaction with him is different, which still yet creates a new road of resilience, where now his abstract art is celebrated more so in the pain of its unique standalone quality. Because would that have existed if he had continued in the same path and the same approval of even his family?
That's something I've never even considered.
If Pablo
is his non-represent, it's not non-representational. It's still representational. It's just abstract.
Yes.
He didn't like non-representational art.
Right.
He wanted pictures to be pictures of something, even if he's distorted it. Is part of what he's doing an expression of pain? I'd never thought about that in terms of the relationship with his father. There's a discussion from John Berger about the stuff at the end of his life, that it was a man in pain, shaking his fist at the cosmos.
How many times have we seen older gentlemen, especially men, not admit our pain until the end?
Well, most men are famous for not going to the doctor.
Always.
The wives want them to go to the doctor, they don't want to go. All right, so
But there's still pain. They still see the bleeding that no one else does, especially our wives. They know that we're uncomfortable. They know that we're dealing with sometimes, and especially in an artistic space, like if I've dealt with students in art, and especially when we're trying to discover, now that we have so many allowed definitions of art, because it's not, because I said that because we live in a different time.
Yeah, Picasso is one of the reasons we have all those possibilities.
Exactly.
You can paint in ways that are not realistic and it can still be acceptable.
So now we're allowed to interpret within that emotional sphere of acceptance to say, I can see there's hurt in your pain. Can you tell me more about in your art? Can you tell me more about that? Versus to say, I just felt like doing it, and because I can't explain, it's not culturally appropriate. It is not your business for me to explain it. It is not this, that, and the third. It cost me money to tell you why I really did it. It would cost my father his reputation if I were to say why I made this choice and show his nose all crazy big or whatever.
Oh my God!
This is my insult to my third grade girlfriend that broke up with me. But I'm not going to tell you that. Like,
no, you sparked so many things. First of all, Glenn Gould, when he was a young teenager studying the piano with his teacher, he got way into Arnold Schoenberg's music. And one of the main reasons people said that he got into it was because his teacher hated it. But Glenn Gould could play it. The amazing thing is Glenn Gould can play that 20th century very atonal, very difficult music and make it sound like music. He can make it sing. It's unbelievable. If you don't, even if you don't like him, listen to some of that. It's like he convinces you there's a melody there when what you're listening to is about as abstract as music has ever gotten.
Okay.
Another thing that you reminded me of, when I was many years ago, got into painting, I just painted this face out of my head, and it was pretty good. I don't have it anymore. I went through a flood and lost a whole lot of my artwork. But I don't even know if I have a picture of that, a photograph of that one anymore. But I was very pleased with it. And I showed it to this one friend of mine, and she worked as a teacher, and she worked with special education children. So she looked at it, and the first thing she said was pain. And I was just like, I was unable to answer her.
Wow.
I don't doubt that she was seeing now, looking at it now, I see what she was seeing, some things that I wasn't dealing with, but I had no idea what they were at the time.
Right.
I later sat down in his therapist's chair and dealt with it. By the way, there is no shame in seeking therapy.
Do it. Absolutely. I'm a pastor and I go to a therapist. Is what it is.
Pastors should go to therapists. Therapists go to therapists. The therapists, I believe, are required to go to therapists.
Because you're shouldering loads. I mean, everyone needs that opportunity to offload what has been unloaded on them.
Yeah,
essentially.
And this is also one of the other things that many people use art for.
Yes,
they use it as a way to. It can be catharsis, right? And it's the same old thing. Why do we like to watch some of these movies where a supposed good guy, and he may not be that good, but he's good enough, basically opens up a huge can of worms for a bad guy and, manages to diminish his enterprises down to nothing, right? I mean, there are so many movies that follow that trajectory. Jimbo's a famous one, which was made into A Fistful of Dollars. The first John Wick movie is the same story. It's
Right.
like basically you stepped on the wrong man's toes,
Right.
and all of a sudden he's gonna. Now we get something from that. It's mysterious what we get from it, because if it actually happened in our own neighborhood,
we'd be
horrified.
up in arms. And
Yeah, who is this man who just killed 15 people? And it's like, yeah, I get that it might have been self-defense, but we don't want this kind of activity. He could have killed my grandmother who lives right over there. Like any number of things could have happened. But when we get to see it in the movie and we know it's not going to touch us, we get a thrill of like. This guy's setting the world to rights, or he's setting things in order, or after he's done, it's, as somebody said once, when the man with no name walks out of the town, the population is diminished and things will be quieter and more peaceful.
Well, I mean, half the time in many places, I think that storyline is so successful is because it allows the audience member to identify with their inward question of rebellion and fight. Like, if I was allowed to fight the way I want to, if I was allowed to express, if I was allowed to rage against whatever machine you want to, what would it sound like? What would it look like? And then I can safely express that in a what is that? Just that third party perspective, vicariously. They live vicariously through the character to be like,
well, of course,
yeah, and like I'll let you do that for me because I'd rather, like, I'm not going to express that I would have these kinds of emotions because I work in such and such a place that's too proper for that, and that's why I even mentioned up the fact of, like, even when people bring up. Let me say that because we have a wide audience. Even when people try to assume the idea of faith, I always remind people that there is a spectrum of faith that includes your worst days.
Well, okay. Every time you put this in the ignition of your car, it's an act of faith.
Especially if you drive a Ford.
My brother was found on the road dead.
Fix or repair daily.
Yeah. Oh my God. And then go to Napa. Never any parts available. No, but okay. All of us at some point or another have had the experience of.
Right.
So does that change the fact that when I got ready to come here,
I still trusted.
I still trusted. I still had that act of faith. I didn't stop and check, hook a bunch of stuff up to my car to see if the battery was working. I do that stuff when it doesn't work.
Well, I mean, that's the thing is what I plug into that is that even on your worst days, even when things don't work out the way you expected them to, you still will do the work enough to fix it back. Because once you fix the issue, if it was a battery, if it was the windshield wipers went out,
right.
I'm just saying that because it started to rain and all of a sudden I realized how cruddy my windshield wipers were. Something that goes wrong, but you understand once I deal with this piece, I still trust the rest of it enough to work again. And so you put the work in, you do what is necessary. That's why I was mentioning even that in let's just say Psalm 13, where the writer is literally in a space of lamentation, saying to his God that, why is this happening? How long must I go through this when I see that everything else around me is not okay? But he doesn't stay in that place of low calibration. It really still acknowledges that I'm not happy. I'm not in a very joyous position, but it doesn't stop me from believing that whoever and however I am won't stay here long compared to eternity. And so he acknowledges eternity, he acknowledges his role in it, he acknowledges that he's still grateful to be connected to even the source of his joy.
You do realize that theological interpretation might not be shared by all readers of the Psalms.
Right.
Because there are some people who contend that, at least among certain groups of Jewish people, the idea of eternity was not even agreed upon. Mm-hmm. So, but where I would say you're on the right track, because I did a study of the Psalms with some people at my church not too long ago. One of the things we noticed was no matter how much the song laments, no matter how violent the psalm may get, whatever, catharsis, like
yes.
we were talking about, it turns around at the end and says, "You, God, you are my God."
Yeah.
It comes back to what you're talking about. Yeah. In other words, though everything else fails around me, I know that I have this, the Muslims have a cool word for it, the trusty handhold that will never slip.
Yeah.
You know, I like that. That's and everyone exercises their life with some kind of faith in something. Even David Hume, who's famous for questioning everything about cause and effect. Mm-hmm. In other words, he famously said something about, if I hold this up like this and do that, I expect it to drop like that, right? Because why? Habit. He says it's not cause and effect. It's a mistake to assume that because I do this and drop it, that's the reason it's falling, or the gravity is the reason it's falling. We don't necessarily know any of that. What we do know is what we observe, and then we live based on those habits.
That's why I appreciate scientists that talk about the observable universe.
Now, the interesting thing is that I said that to one of my intro to fine arts classes, and the guy laughed and said, yeah, and he told me a story that I used later in class that's right along those lines. Guys who are in the space station, in the shuttles or whatever, working, leave the pen here, do something, come back, grab the pen.
And right there.
And then when they went back to Earth, leave the pen here, blop.
I have a godmother that is an astronaut, and she has spoken about that. That if you spend long enough in space, that you really do get used to free fall, and it's hanging out right around there, but it's also, even with science, let's just say, sticking with science, how it is. Science essentially is the observations explained, but it's the observations first. You have to have, from an observed question, an observed process, and an observed answer, that which you can perceive. And so from those conclusions do we come with consistencies. But the key perspective I submit is the ability to observe. So what you reject in observation, you will reject in data. And you will reject in conclusion because you're unable to perceive it in the first place.
But there needs to be a corollary to that.
I'm listening.
And this Immanuel Kant laid it out perfectly, I think. And that is, when we talk about science, we're talking about what he called the phenomenal world. Mm-hmm. The world that's observable. Mm-hmm. If there's a non-observable world, or if we're talking about things that we cannot directly observe and or measure, then we're in a very different space of human reasoning, right? And that's exactly what Hume is getting at as well, is that we assume because we see it do this, and then we can test it and say, okay, well, if I put this much pressure on something, it's going to move this far. And if I put this much pressure, it only moves this far.
Right.
So I can derive cause and effect from these observations. Hume's point being, no, that's the habit you've established. And you're observing based on these habits, these habitual things. And Kant goes so far as to say that we, through perceiving, and he said this well before the Heisenberg uncertainty principle.
Right.
We, through perceiving, are making active determinations about what the world we're seeing means. Just like 5 people read Psalm 13 and come up with 5 different interpretations, maybe, and yet there's more agreement than disagreement. Right? Is science truth? Is truth science? Yes and no. Because, yes, observable reality. If I stub my toe, if I break my leg, if I have a cold, yes, I want science to help me, because all of that is part of the observable reality. And perhaps even some of the things we were talking about with mental health, all that is part of observable reality. But there are some things that seem to be somewhere else, and we're getting really philosophical here. But anyway, Descartes said, I think, therefore I am. Cogito ergo sum. In other words, and what it really did is he said, I'm going to doubt everything. And so he doubted everything he could doubt, and then he finally said, but I can't doubt that there's somebody I'm aware of named Rene Descartes, that I call Rene Descartes, who's doing the doubting. Just like right now, I'm aware that this thing that I call Morris Nelms is making this mouth make noises, and I'm aware of somehow of an existence that may or may not be tied to this physical body. I know it is tied in one way, but I'm not sure if it's completely tied to this physical body. And this is just, Descartes' right on the money here. There's something to that. But then Hume looks at it and says, well, no, I'm not aware of anything I would necessarily call David Hume. I'm aware of various sensations. You have a green bracelet, and you have blue jeans, and you have some cool-looking socks, and there's a camera over there, and there I am, and there's some lights over there. I wouldn't say that all this stuff adds up to David Hume. And I'm like going, you would say that, wouldn't you? So it's like people complain that philosophy never answers its questions. Well, that's fine. They may not be answerable.
That's the whole point. The philosophy is not necessarily the answering of questions. It is the depth of additional questions to the first question, which was never answered, because I need more questions.
Now, one of my favorites, and there was a guy named Reed. I can't remember his first name. Common Sense Philosophy. He was another person kind of responding to Hume. And he was basically, you have a children. So it's like, I'm trying to explain, these are blue jeans to my child. And if I'm thinking like David Hume and saying, well, the sense perceptions that I'm having with my eyes are allowing me to call this a blue pair of pants and this a black shirt, but they may not actually be that, because I'm simply trusting my senses to do this. And of course, a little bit, the child is going, Mommy, Daddy is scaring me. Right?
Exactly.
Blue, black. And Hume himself, for all of this, admitted that, well, I'm a man first and a philosopher second.
Thank you.
And there are some things, I have to function, I have to trust that this is going to work 99 times out of 100.
Yeah,
90 out of 100. Even if I have a old jalopy and it's 5 times out of 10, I'm still going to keep it running or save my money and get a new car.
Respectfully, I will trust a 2005 Honda Civic any day. All right.
Yeah.
It is our blessed journey of life that I would say that it allows us to explore and find the joy, kind of like in an earlier space of, because of the range of thought, emotion, grit, ups and downs, that we then find the vitality of life because of that. It is not always in that. It is because of we experience. Mm-hmm. It is that sphere of the spectrum of life that reminds you that you are alive altogether. Mm-hmm. We actually had a side conversation that really wanted me to hit record, is the fact that we woke up not only knowing that we're about to wear the same black shirt, and we were also both in a state of, we woke up just grateful, knowing that in our own personal lives, this has not been the greatest 5 years that we would have had on our bingo card of expectation.
Okay, yeah.
Yet at the same time,
fair.
It opens up, if I had not gone through what I went through, would I have this gratitude I feel today?
Yeah, that's a good question. Probably not. Yeah, and so once again, maybe Muggeridge is right. Maybe you have to go through pain to learn something. I still reject that notion, but I don't think that struggle necessarily has to be painful. You have to work.
Yeah, it's work.
But work can be. You paint and draw.
Yeah, so, a little bit, not too much.
But you've talked about it, so you understand this. You can pick up a paintbrush, a pencil, whatever, and start doing something, and then realize 2 hours later, I've been doing this a long time.
Right.
And lose all sense of time. Mm-hmm. Well, you're working, but you're not aware of it because you're enjoying the process so much. It's still difficult. It still requires concentration. It still pulls a lot out of you physically, but it's still also a pleasure.
Right.
That's what I mean about I'm not being sure that it has to be something painful to teach you something.
If I would submit, it's the fact that the pain moment, often, let's just say we put a pin in our timeline, at this moment was an incident, a traumatic incident potentially, that derailed the original expectation of life. At the catalytic moment, from there, we parallel that with the moment you pick up the brush. I'm going to paint. What I paint, depending on whether, even if you had a picture in your mind, if I had Bob Ross going on in the background or whatever.
Happy Little Tree.
I love Happy Little Tree.
Bob Ross is great.
Bob Ross got me through some tough times.
I've met many people who don't paint, who like to listen to Bob Ross because his voice is soothing.
There's a YouTube of 10 hours of Bob Ross. You'll go straight to sleep in 20 seconds.
Yeah.
But it is because of the catalytic moment that began your painting journey. This is where I get the wisdom from others, would say it's not the destination, it is the journey. That along the journey, you're doing the work to recalibrate life. To recalibrate why is there air, to recalibrate why do I do what I do, what do I like, who I am, where, if I am thinking who am I, I'll even deconstruct a cart that way. If I am thinking, then who is the I that I am? Because now I am no longer in that previous sphere of existence that I once defined myself by. And who is this new existence now? Because I cannot take it back. I cannot reverse the time wheel of my life. And so therefore I have to address and paint differently what this is today.
If I'm going to be true to myself anyway. Some people try to hang on to this, whatever they were, as they move forward.
Right.
And sometimes that can be tragic to see. And I'll give you one that I experienced personally. I got to see Al Jarreau live one time, not long before he died. And a friend of mine went who'd seen Al Jarreau in person more than once.
I only took Al Jarreau once, but yeah, go ahead.
Oh, he's fantastic. Yes, his band was slamming. Oh, awesome. But what struck me was he was quite a bit older at this point. I mean, he was at least, I can't remember how old he was when he died, but he made it into his 70s. And he did not have, his voice did not have the power that it had when he was a young man.
Right.
When he, and he's still carrying the same kind of big, not big, but loud electric band that he's always had.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
And when it comes time for him to wail over it, it's simply not there.
Strong enough to carry over that foundation.
And so I'm listening to this, I'm going, man, why didn't you could have done this same material with an acoustic bass player and an acoustic guitar.
Right.
And a conga drummer. And you would have forced your audience to listen differently. But then your voice would have still been the star of the show.
Stanley Clarke did that. I saw Stanley Clarke. He simplified his setup so that it would be that much more of what you just said.
Did you
as
see him
long-
at the Paramount when he was here?
I saw him at One World Theater.
Okay. When I saw him at the Paramount, what struck me as interesting was that he had his keyboard player doubling some of the harder bass things.
Yes.
And every once in a while, he just lay out and let the keyboard player
And let
do it.
him
The
do
other
it.
keyboard player's a young guy, and it's easier to do it on keyboard
He'll
than
just
it is on
showcase,
acoustic bass.
look at this man.
Yeah. And then
Look
he
at
would
my
double when he
drummer.
felt like it. Exactly.
I know
But
this
I was like
one.
going, this is a smart guy.
Yes.
I mean,
Yes.
he's in his 70s now.
Oh, yes. I don't think he's in the 80s now.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's a smart guy. He's not trying to do what he did before. I saw McCoy Tyner after he'd had a number of strokes, I believe. I think that's what happened to him. And the right hand was not what it used to be. Mm-hmm. Left hand was still killer. And I learned something watching him. I was like, man, this guy he doesn't have this thing anymore, but he's using octaves brilliantly. Right. So he's dealing with it. Vladimir Horowitz did the same thing. When he played in Moscow when he was 80, he picked a program that was very different from what he would have done when he was in his 30s, where he could basically make thunder, jump out of the piano, right? He didn't try to do that at all because he knows I'm not there anymore. Right?
And that's what I mean, even like when I went to play, I keep going back to this moment because it's what was necessary. I could not rely on my 20-year-old chops as if I was in the woodshed for however long hours of a day because there was no windows in the music building. So you forget what time it was down there.
Kenneth Davison and I were just talking about it. Kenneth Davison said before he got children and got, what he's doing now, he says, I didn't realize how lucky I was. Go to the practice room and sit there for hours.
You sit there for hours and forget what time it was. And then I go to this jazz jam. I'm like, oh, snap, they want to play. The best way I can play is to not play. All I can do is just give you one good pow at the right moment. Now, my maturity and wisdom of the music and the time would create a masterful moment of one note instead of just multiple rudiments up and down the place. Because it would take the maturity of your moment to recognize that you are not at the same moment in time. Mm-hmm. Of what that ability was, what the relationships that you had around you, the supporting cast, so to speak, even the let's say Kenneth Davidson, the freedom you had to exercise that moment. Let's just say, with Ken, he is actually more gifted now.
Oh, yeah.
But the circumstances of being an older man with family and everything have recalibrated when and where he employs certain things and how to do it. Whenever we're trying to drag yesterday's baggage on a new journey, you don't know what the weather is going to be.
That's a good way of putting it. I like that.
And it worked on the last trip because you were prepared for that last trip and had everything. But sometimes today's weather is not going to call for yesterday's baggage.
Well, talk to anybody who's come from Texas and gone, or any warm place, and then gone and spent a winter in a really cold place.
You got to get your coat. As Cat Williams said, I had to buy my coat from there. Like, he went to Chicago. He says, I cannot bring a Texas jacket to Chicago. I need to get my jacket from there.
And we bought a jacket for my wife in Iowa, where they have like severe winters. It was beautiful leather, fur lined. Like, nothing's going to get through that, We brought it down here. She couldn't wear it. She could not wear it. She ended up giving it to her sister in Oklahoma City. Right. Because there's wind there and it gets cold there some of the year. But down here, it's like, yeah. And I bought some gloves in Iowa that were perfect for outdoor gigs down here. My hands would never get cold.
Right.
My hands still got a little bit cold in Iowa, but they make gloves.
But what's our cold in Texas compared to Iowa's single and negative digits?
I had the experience once on a New Year's Eve gig, standing outside for a minute, and the temperature was 10 degrees below zero. And that, if there's no wind, and you're not out there long enough to get really cold, it's fascinating. I've never experienced that any other time where I realized everything's shut down. There's no bugs, there's no birds. Everything's shut down because it's too cold for anything. It's just like, there's a beauty to it. Now, do I want to live in it? No. No. I moved down to Texas. I was deciding whether to move north or move south. I'm just like, family south. I don't like winter. I'm going south. But this business is a struggle. Another story that strikes me. Mozart starts playing the piano, picking out thirds when he's 3 years old, is writing music by the time he's 6. By the time he's a teenager, he's written an opera. It's just musically.
Right.
Now, he couldn't balance his checkbook.
Right.
So he had financial struggles, and he and his wife had children every time they looked at each other. So, it's like, so he's got those struggles. Apparently, he loved having a family, he loved being married, and he, all that, and he loved writing music, and he loved the party life. The only time I know of that he really struggled musically was when he decided to write the Jupiter Symphony. By this point, he's been introduced to Bach and Handel and counterpoint that he hadn't heard before, and he's going crazy for fusion. His wife loves him too, and he's like, "Okay, I'm going to see if I can do it too." And so he wrote an ending to the Jupiter Symphony that I believe is a 6-voice fugue, maybe a 4-voice fugue. If somebody knows and you see this, correct me in the comments. But he wrote this fugue to end the Jupiter Symphony. I've listened to it since I found out about this. It's very good. But he wrote his father and said, "I have had no end of difficulty with this." This is the guy who's probably born with absolute pitch. Just music was welling out of him as soon as I'm not sure how much of anything is talent versus work. Michelangelo famously said, if you saw how much work I put into this, you wouldn't call it talent. Right? But Mozart is one of those that brings me up short, because by the time he's 6, he's writing good piano music. By the time he's, in his 20s, he's writing great stuff, and he just got better and better and better, right, in some respects. There's some of his music that's kind of glib. Yeah, I get it. He's writing for the Enlightenment. Everybody's wearing their velvet coats, and nobody wants to act like they're too emotionally affected, so there's this kind of restraint to some of his music that I have to give my desires over to the time and the attitudes of the time to appreciate it fully. But then at his best, Magic Flute, marvelous. The Great Mass in C minor, oh my goodness. It's one of the best things I've ever heard. But even he hit a wall musically at least once in his career. And another one that gets me is that Ellington had those moments when he was a young man and was composing where it's just pouring out of him. But Sophisticated Lady, he said he wrote the whole song, all 32 measures, in a few minutes, except for the 2-measure section that gets him out of the B section, the bridge, where it says, smoking, drinking, never thinking of tomorrow. That part, there was a 2-measure section where he gets out of the bridge back to the A section. It's one of the most masterful pieces of music composition I've ever seen. He said it took him a month to come up with that. 2 measures.
You can sit down.
Two measures.
Sit down and get the whole, everything going on, but those last, and let's just say, here's my twist moment. My point is, you can have everything, but the way to transition from one section to the other, is the joy of the piece. That's the joy of life. Is like, how do I transition from one section to the next so that it flows and it connects everything?
No wonder we get along so well. One of the things I've mentioned to people as a learning device is I said, watch drummers. The hardest thing for a drummer to do is to transition from one part of the kit to another.
Oh my God.
Everything else is easy. Right? You were talking about being able to adjust. I knew a drummer, didn't practice that much. He's a fantastic musician. He could play any tempo you liked. Ding, 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 ding. That's physical. You've got to practice that. Well, he had a way of playing that where he would just play the backbeat on the cymbal and make you hear ding, 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 ding. So he'd be playing bash, 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 bang, bang, dang, dang. He's just playing that, but he's bouncing just enough that you're hearing ding, 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 ding. You're still feeling that and hearing that. And it's like, how do you do that? And everybody complains, well, he doesn't have any chops. No, he doesn't practice. I know he doesn't have any chops, but it's like he can sure find the groove, and he can. It's like, wow, okay, I've known other musicians like that. They'd be that much better if they practiced. but, you know, here, drummer can go, you know, as soon as they have to, there's a very strong possibility of a train wreck. Mm-hmm. There's a very strong possibility of dropping a stick, getting off, missing anything. And every transition seems to be on the drums is like that. Bang, dang, dang, ding, dang, dang, ding, dang. You know, every time you have to do that, you have to plan those, don't you? Or when you're practicing, you find ways to move, to make the motions without having to
I would say
think about them.
As a lesson that we had from Butch Miles, there are certain rudiments that we established that create a fluidity of change. You do certain etudes that lead, let's just say, you can literally have the same notes you would play around the drums, but it depends on what hand you start with that you end with. If I start with a left, my right hand is free. I can do the same thing with the right. Now my left is over here because I finished that. But now, where am I going to end?
You're going to have to cross your hands to keep the flow going, which is going to be clumsy.
Either if I end, because on the first establishment I ended on my right. So if I end on my right again, I'm not as free to hit a cymbal over here. I mean, they're probably ending it on my snare, or I'd have to literally physically come all the way over, open my arm to the end with the right. So
which means that your timing is probably going to be low,
right?
late.
And that creates drag. It creates probably even a rush if you know you messed up. So then your timing is off.
Overcompensate.
The foundational expectation is really from those rudiments is that you learn how to start. So when you do finish, you're open to finish.
That's so fun, man. This is so funny. See, I play at the drums. I can play with brushes. I can do that at a decent tempo for a good while and not get tired. Don't ask me to do anything else. I can sit down with a snare drum. I can play you some time, you know. And I can play a Latin beat by using that same pattern, like doom, tat, tat, doom, tat, tat, doom.
He just goes from swing to straight. But okay,
yeah, exactly. But so those are my two drum tricks, and I've used them to teach.
Yeah,
because I can give somebody a groove while they're playing piano for me. So I'm just saying to say I don't know a whole lot about drums, but I've observed, and I was working with a conga drummer in church, and he was struggling with this one groove, and I said, man, stop thinking so much. Just play 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and just listen to it, and then you'll figure out what you need. And it worked. Which, when you said that about rudiments, I mean, that's single strokes. That's one of the first rudiments you learn.
Right.
Right? And then mama, daddy, mama, daddy, mama, daddy. That's the next one you learn. And between those two, you can practically build a style.
It's always about, and then as you add into those rudiments, you really add the oddities. The important part about it is that the mathematical fun about it is that everything is essentially always odd. It's never even. It's very rare.
Oh my God! You know that swing dancers dance 6 against 4, right?
Right. But the filament is always in like a triplet, a quintuplet. If I'm rhythmically setting it up to set up a 1. That's the other part. I'm always setting up to enter in on 1. The rudimental perspective, even into a mama daddy 1, because then I'm turning into that essentially turns into like a paradiddle, but essentially it's written as 16, 16, 16, 4 16ths onto a quarter. That gives you that pulse, but really you're really essentially doing 5 rhythmic notes.
By the way, you can hear the difference in a drummer and a non-drummer in the way he does and the way I do it.
Because I think approaching the rhythm of the drums is the fact that we're always, this is where I was going to get it, is that we're always setting up the present in the future.
Yep.
We have to, like when I'm reading big band charts, I will never forget my first time reading a big band chart, and I was so upset because I literally read it the time is literally just quarter notes, and I'm like, okay, this is crazy that I'm just doing that. No, keep time. Don't do the quarter note thing. That just means keep time and just do ding 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 ding. I'm like, okay, that's not written, but okay. So what do I have to pay attention to? You have to pay attention to the hits of the band that's written in. Okay, that's nice. So then I play the hits, and then ba 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 ba, and then they're like, no, set it up. That's not written in there. This is the thing.
Welcome to the club.
This is what the average public does not know about big band charts and big band music, and essentially musicians in general.
Yeah.
We learn everything in advance to then insert it at the right moment to approach what is written.
Have you seen Standing in the Shadows of Motown?
Oh, man. Bits and pieces, but not. I need to sit down and digest it.
It talks about how Marvin Gaye or whoever, Jackson 5, whatever, would come into the studio in Detroit with a song, but they wouldn't have it fleshed out.
Right.
And then these guys, the Funk Brothers, the studio musicians that were on call at Motown, they would figure out, okay, well, it needs this, and it needs a little bit of that, and it needs a little bit of this. And they put all this stuff in, they just make up on the spot. The bow-da-doo-da-boo-dang, the guitar riff on My Girl, that was made up at the studio by the guitar player. It wasn't part of the song that they wrote. And so it's the same thing you're talking about. That little riff is fundamental to what made that song work so well.
Right.
Yeah.
But it approaches. I kind of backpedal. Like my approach is to say into approaching a transition moment. So let's say the transitional moment may be written as the band hits ba 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 da da da, because we heard that at Butch, and so with that, it's a very common jazz phrasing, but then to set it up, it means I'm always thinking maybe 3 to 4 bars ahead. Because I got to fill in the space of what that open tension is for everybody to land transitionally to the next bar.
Yeah.
I said all of that because to me, in reference to Ellington, the knowledge of self and fundamentals and rudiments allows you to fill in the space of your transition from one section to the next. If you're unaware of who you fundamentally are, you don't know how to transition. And so you read it and like, what do I do with this? I can't interpret this. I can't do this. I cannot exist in this next section because you don't know how to essentially set it up.
Yeah, you have to know your music, your repertoire. You have to know your instrument, and then you have to know who you are. You have to know yourself. And all three of them are fundamental. The third one, knowing yourself, is probably the hardest one. Because like we were just talking about Al Jarreau, I saw him towards the end of his career, and I thought, you're diminishing yourself here unnecessarily. At least that was my reaction to it.
And that's fair because and this is the despair of fame is that you're known for what you're known for, not known for who you are.
Yeah, that's true.
And so once you're famous for a motif, and if you have not used the opportune moments to cash in on artistic evolution, then you will always be expected to do what it was. That's why I like Aretha Franklin, who was an excellent musician, but did not necessarily cash in on that until her later years. Really, she cashed in as a singer, but until her later years as the queen and the godmother, and forever, then she sits down with her mink coat and sits down at the grand piano and just plays and shows that off, and people are like, "Oh snap, you have this?" And she was like, "I've had it the whole time." I did not.
Oh, there's a clip. If you can find it, it's on YouTube. Don Cornelius, Soul Train. He has Smokey Robinson and Aretha Franklin, and they're singing together. I think it's It's one of Smokey's hits.
Okay. Well, he's got about 7.
And yeah, there's a bunch of them. It's one of the best. It's just her at the piano and him and her together, and her voice is 10 times his because he's very very light falsetto, pretty voice.
Yeah.
But she respects him so much she blends with. Oh, it's gorgeous.
Right.
Oh,
and she's always been a master, but I would like to say such a master that she did not showcase all of that at the same time. Didn't have to, but because each one of that, and each aspect of it was just a juggernaut in itself. But it also, she transitioned with her age and with her time to consistently be on top of every moment because she did not try to re-emulate a previous moment.
Right.
Even like to the fact of like she never sang on the same key. As she got older, she would bring things down. I remember even finally, what's her name? Gladys Knight started paying attention to that and started bringing keys down and trying not to sing Midnight Train to Georgia in the original key. I'm like, that's not your key anymore. Calm down. And it's learning from these musicians in life, and that I am learning better the understanding of transitioning through from section to section.
Yeah. The thing you were talking about with figuring out transitions and stuff on the drums, it's the same thing that pianists have to practice in terms of like making sure you're using the best fingering for things so that you can hit it consistently the same way.
Nothing more than like, wait a minute, what did I do?
Exactly. When you're learning, you may be all over the map, but once you eventually figure out, okay, this is what I need to do. And that thing you said about everything being odd, Barry Harris has a dissertation that he launches into from time to time about everything in the universe operates in threes. Right? Mm-hmm. Now, I don't know if it's true or not, but he makes a real good case for it musically. So if you're in 4/4 time, hula 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 hula, there's that. But then you've also got this thing. Yes. Dang, doom, dang, doom, dang, 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 dang. 1 cup of tea, 1 cup of tea.
Yep.
Yes, you've got that going on at the same time. And I didn't nail it. I didn't quite nail it with you. I needed to pay more attention to it. But nonetheless, if you've got that going on, you can hear there's some footage of Barry playing with Cannonball Adderley. And Cannonball and Nat aren't doing that. They're just playing. Barry's like 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 1 2 3 4 1 2 3, and you hear and you're like, oh. Okay.
You didn't realize there was that overarching,
that 3 is in there, woven into the 4, yes. So you get this big beat, and it's when you experience it, when you see it and feel it, you're like, oh, it loosens everything up in a certain way. Not to say that Cannonball and Nat don't sound great on those recordings, they do. It's just Barry starts to play and you realize, oh, there's another way to approach this. Yeah.
It becomes, and I think here's in a way one of my final thoughts is the fact that once you realize that 3 over, let's say, a linear expectation, because oftentimes with a saxophone, a monophonetic instrument, you can only make one sound at a time. Oftentimes, I've experienced with wind players like that, they think linearly. It's hard for them to see phrasing in an overarching scale.
Yeah, well, Barry told me Sonny Stitt didn't get it,
and
he said Charlie Parker understood it perfectly.
Wow!
And he said he was surprised to find out that Sonny Stitt didn't really understand it,
because to me, that creates the glue of the phrase, because that's why Parker knows that it's not what I start. It's the fact that it's gonna take me on that roller coaster to end where I want to end, and the glue of that triplet or perspective, it allows it, or the rule of 3, let's just say like that, it allows it to give it rest points that are technically not rest points, but they are phrase moments that are connected so that even rhythmically it covers what would be normally final moments. and so it prolongs what should have been. Let me say it. I'm in. Where am I?
Last time I checked, we were in Texas.
Yeah, I'm in Ty Reagan's. I'm sorry, I'm in Ty Reagan's Jr.'s recital because you actually gave him a bebop. You gave him a bebop lick that he then started using all the time, and we literally called him as a sort of little jab. We called him Data Little Lotto because he did that all the time.
See, I'm just finding out about influence I didn't want any more arrow. That's awesome.
It was a running joke in jazz ensemble because then he started pulling that in there. But that lick he would do a lot. But so then I would always sort of overarch his phrasing so he never seemed like he ran out of an idea. Mm-hmm. But he had to breathe.
Well, but that's okay. But that's another aspect of it. Miles Davis talks about when he listened to a drummer, he always checked out, do they phrase with me? Can they end my phrases? In other words, if a trumpet player says exactly, is there this communication going on between us, right? And a lot of jazz musicians, and okay, if any jazz musicians are listening, this is one of my pet peeves, is I play something and you try to double it with me. Don't do that. Let me play it and then you respond to it.
If I'm in that position, I normally like to sing the chorus with you and then pull off of it. So if we both said I'll come in with those last 3 or 4 notes if I catch it rhythmically, but then I'll finish it.
Well, that's different. That's different. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about
okay.
I've had this experience with bass players, some especially, and bass players mostly is like no, don't do that. I wanted to play ba doo dee da against you going ba boo dee. I wanted the 3 against 4, and you didn't give it to me because you went right with me right away. Now, I'm not saying that some people don't do that. There are some people on recordings who do that.
Yeah.
It's just not what I particularly enjoy. I particularly like it when it's, when the 2 parts are more contrapuntal.
There you go.
Yeah.
And that, if I had an overarching perspective, is that it is the counterpoint of music and the counterpoint of life that creates music itself. Something need to work against itself in time so they can align in time.
Okay, I once, this is Morris being a curmudgeon, but I'll go ahead and say it anyway because I'm proud of it. I really don't care for classical music without counterpoint, and I really don't care for jazz music that doesn't swing. To me, it's like if it's classical music, I want to hear counterpoint. If it's jazz music, I want it to swing. Maybe I'm narrow-minded. There's a lot of other music out there that I like.
But don't call it jazz.
It doesn't necessarily have counterpoint. It doesn't necessarily swing. But don't tell me it's jazz or classical. Yeah.
Friends, it's been a great time. Another Tuesdays with Morris. We're grateful to hang with you. We hope that you enjoyed our conversation and continue to converse with us even in the comments and your feedback. We enjoy it. Shout out to all of our friends and family that are listening from near and far, and we hope to see you again. Take care.
Beautiful.
I enjoyed it.
Oh, it was fun.
You're listening to a frozen truth.